If you're thinking about growing apples, now is the time to test different kinds and talk with local growers. This advice comes from gardening writer Lee Reich. His books include The Pruning Book and Weedless Gardening. Reich grows an apple called Hudson's Golden Gem, and he does so for one reason: the taste. He says the fruit's wonderful flavor makes it truly special. When you buy apples at the store, your choice is limited to the 12 or more kinds available for sale. They might be chosen because they look pretty, ship well, store well, or have a taste that many people like. Gardeners, however, have more choices. They can plant any of more than 5,000 different kinds of apples. They can also plant and grow without worrying about appearance or shipping ability. In the early 20th century, plant expert Liberty Hyde Bailey co-founded the American Society for Horticultural Science. About apples, he said, "Why do we need so many kinds? Because there are so many folks." Gardeners can also harvest their apples just as each kind reaches its moment of perfection. Reich says his Macoun apples taste much better than any Macoun apples found in stores. One reason is because his can be left to ripen until they nearly fall off the tree. Here are some other flavorful apples to plant. While some may have small problems, Reich says they all taste great. The Ashmead's kernel apple was first grown more than 200 years ago in a garden belonging to a Dr. Ashmead in Gloucester, England. The apple has a reddish golden-brown color. Inside, it has tasty, sharp flesh. Cox's orange pippin is another old apple from England. It was first grown by Richard Cox in 1825. This apple's orange and red color makes it unpopular in the American market, but it is loved for its strong taste. Cox is still grown by British farmers, even though it has some problems with storage and shipping. Ellison's orange is another British apple that came from Lincolnshire in 1911. It is a late summer or early autumn apple, golden yellow with stripes, with juicy flesh. It has a slight taste of anise. Not all good apples come from England. Macoun started in New York in 1923. Hudson's Golden Gem is also American and was first grown in an Oregon garden in 1931. Another American apple that Reich has grown is Newtown Pippin, which began in New York City about 300 years ago. The yellow fruit has a sharp taste. It should be stored and eaten after Christmas for the best taste. Newtown pippins were shipped to England in colonial times because they were so tasty. The Matsu Crispin apple came from Japan in 1948. This large, round, yellow apple has a spicy taste. Jonah Gold was introduced 40 years ago by the New York State Agricultural Experiment Station. It is a crisp, tasty apple that seems to explode in your mouth with juice. Reich also includes in his apple collection New York's Liberty. which dates to 1978. Besides having a wonderful flavor, Liberty is also resistant to many diseases. But before you run out to buy trees to grow the kinds you love to eat, Reich does have a warning. Apples are not easy to grow in many parts of the country. The plants require yearly pruning and insect control. But if you're willing to learn how to keep those unwanted insects away, a few kinds of trees chosen for their taste will give you years of good eating.
Compost is organic material that, when added to soil, can help plants grow. And there are many different kinds of organic material. Food waste, grass cuttings, and other plant remains make up more than 28% of what Americans throw away. That information comes from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA website tells how composting helps the environment. It says composting helps to keep soil healthy. It reduces the need for chemical fertilizers. Composting can help the production of good bacteria and fungi, which break down organic matter. Composting also reduces methane gas emissions from landfills. Studies have linked methane to rising temperatures in Earth's atmosphere. Yet many Americans do not compost their food and plant waste. In 2014, a survey of 2,000 Americans found that 72% of those questioned did not compost. However, 67% said they would do so if it were easier. The National Waste and Recycling Association paid for that study. There are only a few U.S. communities that have passed laws restricting some organic material from garbage collection. 2 examples are New York City and San Francisco, California. And 5 months ago, the state of Vermont banned the collection of food waste. While the numbers of Americans composting remains low, some people are trying to increase the number of composters. They often talk about landfills releasing methane into the atmosphere.
Garbage piles contribute to global warming, and so there's a lot of methane that's released, and from everything that scientists know, that's contributing to the warming of the planet, which is not a good thing.
That is Katie Ablard of Maryland. She has been composting for 15 years and enjoys teaching others.
Instead of putting our food waste into the garbage, we're putting our food waste into the compost pile. And in the compost pile in our backyard, within a couple of months, that breaks down, and it breaks down and turns into really, really fertile soil.
Some countries are much better at making compost than the United States. In a 2019 report, the World Economic Forum found that South Korea recycled 95% of its food waste. But this did not happen overnight. In 1995, South Koreans only recycled 2% of their food waste. Back in 2013, the Yale School of the Environment published a paper on composting around the world. At that time, researchers found that Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, Denmark, Switzerland, Belgium, Austria, and Germany sent less than 3% of their food waste to landfills. If you want to make compost, there are some things to know. The EPA website says all composting requires 3 basic ingredients. Number 1, brown material, such as dead leaves and tree branches. Number 2, green material, such as grass cuttings and vegetable waste. Number 3, water. When composting outdoors, the EPA offers these suggestions. Choose a dry area for your compost pile. The area should receive very little sunshine. Make sure there is no standing water on the ground. Next, add green and brown materials in equal amounts. As they are collected, try to break down larger pieces, and add water if the brown materials are too dry. If your area gets a lot of rain, cover up the compost pile. And make sure you can easily get to the area, but animals cannot. When the waste material at the bottom is dark and rich in color, your compost is ready to use. Here is another piece of advice. Mix or stir the compost often. This adds air to keep it light. Or as Katie says, fluffy. What you do not want, she warns, is for the material to get hard or compacted.
I think of it as stirring it and turning the compost and getting it so it's kind of fluffy, so that the soil is kind of light in area and not compacted. You don't want it hard and compacted. And you do need airflow, yeah.
The EPA website says that if you do not have space for a compost pile outside your home, you can compost materials indoors. But you may need a special container for that. The site says to be careful of what you throw in. A properly managed compost bin will not attract animals and will not smell bad, and your indoor compost should be ready in 2 to 5 weeks. Katie Ablard says composting is great for the environment, but she says it gives her a smaller but still very important prize.
Twice a year, I'm able to pull out the soil that the worms and the other bugs and insects have created by breaking down the food waste. And that soil or compost then I use in our garden. And so the soil in our community garden is very rich and very healthy and has consistently been good soil for growing vegetables. So it's instead of using chemical fertilizers and it's instead of using other products that might help things grow, but we can just use the compost.
As the cold season hits, some Americans put vegetables like corn, peppers, green beans, and okra away in freezers. Tomatoes are put in cans. Turnips, beets, and winter squashes are stored in refrigerators or cool areas of the home. But American gardening expert Lee Reich says some vegetables can still be picked fresh from the garden through the cold season. They can survive through some snow and temperatures dropping to the teens. Many gardeners get closer each year to the goal of growing a year-round supply of vegetables. Reich has advice for those who want to grow vegetables in the colder part of the U.S. and the world. Lettuce, endive, spinach, and parsley are among the cold, hardiest vegetables, he says. Late summer plantings of these vegetables can start as tomatoes, peppers, and other warm season crops end. The exception is parsley, which needs a long season, so it must be planted earlier in summer. The plant might no longer be a thick, colorful green, but it is still tasty. Other vegetables make fresh salads complete. Arugula is quite cold hardy. A few kinds of radish are still firm and sharp tasting. One of the hardiest, tastiest of fresh salad greens, Reich says, is mash, also known as corn salad. The soft leaves hide the fact that this plant can do well in very cold weather. Instead of planting mash, he just lets it plant itself. Overwinter plants seed themselves in early summer, but the seeds do not start to grow until the cool weather of later summer. Reich moves the young plants in early autumn. Over the years, his own autumn salad vegetables have lived through cold weather under different protective structures. One year, they were housed inside homemade plexiglass structures. Another year, they took cover beneath very small glass greenhouses held together by wires. And yet another year, he put them in bottomless wooden boxes covered with clear glass. This year, Reich put his lettuces and endives under hanging covers. They hold in some heat, but let air, light, and water pass through. Some plant beds get metal circles covered in clear, soft plastic, which lets in more sunlight, but does not give as much cold protection. For cold parts of the U.S. in late November, it is not too late to make some protective covering for these plants. In sheltered areas, leaves of any salad plants often remain a bright green and strong after plants in more open areas have turned watery green and weak. For example, spinach and lettuce planted with their backs against a house or garage wall are not exposed to as much cold as plants growing farther away. And any structure, even a low stone wall, takes in heat as the sun hits it each day. Then it releases this energy slowly through the night. This can help nearby plants. In parts of the U.S. in late fall, soft, edible leaves are least likely to be found on plants given an eastern exposure. Leaves that freeze at night cannot take immediate thawing from the morning sun. Although spinach, lettuce, mash, endive, and parsley are alive, they are not growing. The weather is too cold and there is too little light. The leaves of these plants are just sitting, waiting to be harvested. Very soon, temperatures in some parts of the U.S. will get low enough to put a permanent end to the fresh vegetable harvest for the season. Some areas even have average low temperatures of -28 Celsius. The roots of most spinach, leek, parsley, and corn salad plants, and maybe a few of the lettuce plants, will survive outdoors. Their leaves will freeze. But in the spring, these roots will fuel growth of healthy new leaves and become the first harvest next season. Reich says that those first spring harvests and these last harvests in the autumn taste better than any salad greens you can buy.